agenda. We're moving on to action items, number 11 on your agenda. And the first thing is to receive a presentation of the 2024 5-year rate study and consider adoption of resolution to approve the district's 2024 5-year water, wastewater, and recycled water rate study and cost allocation plan. And we have our Chief Financial Officer, Mary Legasco, at the podium to start. Thank you.
Thank you. So good evening, members of the board, fellow staff, and the public. The item before you tonight is the 2024 cost allocation plan and the 2024 water, wastewater, and recycled water 5-year rate study. So over the course of the several months, Mark Hildebrand, or the district's independent rate study consultant, has given us a series of presentations walking us through the cost of service and revenue requirements that will provide the district with a rate structure and the rates needed to support the goals and objectives of the district. Mr. Hildebrand was also contracted to perform a cost allocation plan in parallel to the study. So, and with that, I would like to turn it over to Mark, who will be giving us a presentation on the final 5-year water, wastewater, and recycled rate study.
I feel like we were just talking just recently. I'm going to join by Zoom here really quick. Sorry, I should have queued it up a little better earlier.
And Mark, while you're doing that, may I ask if directors have questions? May we interrupt you with questions, or would you rather us hold them?
I would be delighted to hear your questions along the way.
Thank you.
I also am aware that this is certainly the second time in under a week that I'll be given basically the same material, and it's probably the 4th time that we've gone through it together. Are there any members of the public that I can't see or otherwise who have not heard the presentation, who don't need to go into details?
Right now, members of the public, I think they belong to our staff. And so I don't
know. There's 2 that I don't know who they are.
Oh, I only see one. Oh, I can't see
There's a
them.
phone number.
I cannot see them. There I go. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm looking at the wrong thing. There are 3 individuals. One is the AMP staff. So I can't tell you whether they've heard the presentation or not.
Okay. So my question was gonna be, do you want me to make it pretty abbreviated and just maybe pause if there's questions? Because I think everyone's pretty familiar.
And the full presentation is available online. So if any member of the public would like to see the full presentation, they can go to our website, go to the rates link, and go to the public hearing, and you'll be able to see, or the public workshop, not hearing, they'll be able to see the full presentation.
And the full workshop was on April 17th. If you're searching by dates, it was April 17th last week.
Plus it's included in the packet for tonight's meeting on the website.
So I'll keep it pretty short and sweet, but by all means, if I'm covering anything too quickly, or if you want a refresher, please jump in and let me know. So thank you for the introduction, Mary. It's been a pleasure working with the district and the staff on this project. We're here with our final recommendation. And at the conclusion of this presentation, the action is for the board would be for the board to direct staff to send out the 218 notice. So that's this will be the final presentation before we hold the public hearing in June. Which time we'll come back one last time to hold the formal public hearing, and that's when the board will be voting up or down. I assume that no protests exist. So I'll cover rate setting basics really quickly, discuss the financial plan findings for each of the 5 cost centers, talk about some of the structural changes to the rates, and look at some of the specific bill impacts. This slide is actually pretty important just to cover because it is important to understand that as a rate consultant, I've got no interest in one cost center or another cost center or one type of rate structure or another rate structure. My job is to make sure that the district is doing things in compliance with the law and that you have rates that are fully defensible. And that's what we've done with this study. So 218 requires you not to charge rates that exceed your needs for revenue or disproportionately charges one group over another. And so that has been the primary focus of the study. And then we've also achieved other objectives of the district along the way. The other part of 218 is the procedural requirements, which is the public hearing. So we'll be sending out a notice for a 45-day waiting period. Then we hold a public hearing, and that will give the public a formal opportunity to participate in the process. For the rate setting process, we do the revenue requirements, which is the final financial plan. The cost of service covers, make sure that we understand how much different types of customers are costing, how much it costs to serve them. And then the rate design is ultimately what the bill looks like when customers receive their bill. We'll jump into the financial plan topics. So at a high level, we did cover 5 of the district's cost centers. There's a 6th one, the GSA, which we were just hearing about, which was not covered by the study. And to make sure that different costs are allocated fairly between the different cost centers, we did update the cost allocation plan, which looks at different metrics for any costs that aren't directly allocated to a cost of service or to a cost center. We use the cost allocation plan to allocate costs based on different metrics, depending on the nature of the cost. Some assumptions we made for the 10-year projection. We have some percentages here. I won't go through all of them, but these were based on detailed conversations with staff and using as much information that we have available to us. Obviously, we don't have a crystal ball. These are projections, and some may be more real than others at the end of the day. But we use the best available information, and if anything deviates substantially from this, then we'll have to take a look at it when that happens. But with the knowledge that we have now, these are the best percentages that we could come up with. We did talk about how there was a pretty significant capital improvement program that was developed earlier. Before I started my process, the staff engineering group looked at the district's capital spending needs and identified a lot of projects for the different cost centers, a total of $90 million over 5 years. And you can see how that's broken down by year and by cost center down below. And a lot of the process that we went through was really prioritizing those capital needs and looking at what really needs to happen over the next 5 years and how we're going to fund it. The district has a group of highly skilled and dedicated staff that are out there every day working hard to make sure that the infrastructure is maintained. A lot of this work is not seen by the public. And it's important to understand that the cost of providing water to customers is not the cost of the actual molecules of water. It's the cost of getting the water from the ground to their tap under pressure and high quality. So a lot of that is done, behind the scenes. Folks don't see it, but there's a lot of infrastructure that needs to be maintained, and the district has a great staff doing exactly that. So we did revise the capital plan, the 5-year capital plan. You can see how the numbers go. So the revision of the CIP was both in the form of sort of sharpening the pencil and really prioritizing projects and rescheduling a few, deferring a few, but also identifying which of those projects were going to be bond funded versus pay-go, which is cash funded. And the bond funded projects were for the next 3 years for 3 of the cost centers, and those were the cost centers that were looking at the largest rate increases that had cash flow issues for in the immediate future. And so bond funding allows you to move forward with capital spending without spiking the rates too high. So we'll go through the different cost centers. But first, a quick reminder that if you look regionally at water rates, You are, on the lower half of the cost of water in the region. And when folks ask me why different water utilities have different rates, there's a whole list of reasons why it might happen. But I would say that the number one reason is the age of the infrastructure and how proactive the capital spending program is. Those are the two biggest impacts, and then there's a bunch of other factors as well. But really, districts that are proactive about their capital spending program tend to have higher rates, but in the long run, they're going to manage their infrastructure better, and ratepayers are going to benefit from that. So for the forward financial plan, a quick snapshot of cash reserve. Current cash reserves are nearly $5 million. Revenues are $14 million, and operating budget and debt is about $12 million, which leaves about $2.5 million available for annual cash funded capital, which is a bit less than what Groundwater needs. You can see over the next 5 years, Groundwater is looking to spend over $20 million, so that would come to $4 million a year. And so this is the bit more complicated graph, but the top graph shows revenues compared to expenses. So the revenues are the background and the expenses are the foreground. And you can see that the light blue portion of the columns is the capital spending, and you can see it's absent for the next 3 years. And it's not because we're not doing any capital spending, it's because it's being debt financed during those 3 years. And then we'll go back to cash financing starting in fiscal 28. So that's how the utility is able to start to rebuild its reserves over the next 3 years, despite the fact that capital spending is increasing to $4 million per year. And as I showed earlier, it can only afford $2.5 million with the current state.
Yeah. Mark, don't move from this slide, we have a question.
Yep, go ahead.
So I just want to make sure I fully understand what I'm saying here in this slide and in the previous slide. So for the ORD, and this would apply to the other cost centers too, but for the ORD, we've had our engineering staff look at the state of the ORD water system, ask themselves, what do we need to replace and when, so that the system doesn't break unexpectedly. We've asked them to sharpen their pencil about that and maybe push some projects out so we're not burdening our ratepayers too much. And we're gonna be able to pay for a good chunk of that with these current rate increases, but we're still going to have to borrow some money from the bond market in order to be able to accomplish those minimal CIP expenditures over the next 5 years. Am I accurately characterizing this?
Yes, minimal, I'm not sure if that's the right adjective, but yes, the basic.
Well, we're gonna have to borrow some and we're gonna have to raise some rates.
Right, yes, correct, yeah.
And is it true that if, let's say, 5 or 10 or 15 years ago, we had been as a board and a staff a bit more proactive, we could have raised the rates back then and squirreled away some money and avoid borrowing today, and of course, having to pay interest charges on what we borrow today?
That's an accurate statement.
Okay, but the facts are, we didn't do that. So our ratepayers for the past 10, 15 years have gotten a bit of a rate break, so to speak, but now the cows have come home and have to be fed.
Correct.
Okay, just want to make sure I understood it. Thank you.
Any other questions on this graph? Or move on to the others? Okay, so that's forward water. And on the Marina, for Marina water, you can see that currently there's a deficit. So Marina water is currently unable to cover its operating and debt, the tune of about $500,000. So Marina water is the utility that needs the largest adjustment. The capital spending needs for the next 5 years is $6 million, so just over $1 million a year. And so you can see that we're drawing reserves down to the minimum level over the next couple of years, and debt financing all the capital spending. and increasing rates by 20% for the next 3 years. Okay. On the sewer side, Marina Sewer currently has a surplus of about $600,000 a year to pay for capital. It does have needs that are similar, about $6 million a year. Sorry, $6 million over the next 5 years, so just over $1 million per year. And similar situation where we're debt financing the next 3 years, and in this case, the reserves are improving a bit more quickly at 15% per year for 3 years, then 10% for 2 years. Ord Sewer. Ord Sewer was in the best shape financially. It has a surplus of $2.3 million. And so this list of capital projects actually did not need to be reduced from what engineering had originally identified for Ord Sewer. So Ord Sewer is going to be seeing the full recommended series of projects that had been identified. And so the rate increases here are 4%, which is just over inflation. We'll still be drawing down a bit on reserves because it is a pretty significant increase in capital spending over what had been done traditionally. But it will recover at the same pace as all the other cost centers. And then for recycled water is a different animal simply because it's a brand new utility, only has one customer at this time. It's expecting a lot more customers in the years to come. But as it's developing, the reserves are very modest because it just hasn't had time to build reserves. And it doesn't have much left over for capital spending, but luckily it doesn't have many capital needs at this time because the infrastructure is so new that it only needs a bit of maintenance. We are going to be drawing down on the capacity charge funds to pay for debt service, which is appropriate. And then as new customers join the system, the revenues will increase that way. It's kind of hard to fully understand the timing of when those customers will come online. There's, it's kind of lurches forward and backs up. So the timing of those new customers is hard to know exactly, but it is expected that the revenues will increase pretty significantly as they join. And then you can see the capital spending here. So the additional color that's added to this graph is the pink, which is the capacity charge reserves, which are being drawn down to help pay for growth. Switching gears to cost of service and rate design. The water rates are currently, you have a fixed service charge based on the meter size, it's a fixed monthly meter charge, and then you have tiered consumption rates for all customers who all receive 10 units of water, 10 HCF, which is 748 gallons per HCF, so that's about 7,500 gallons per month of tier 1 water. We are proposing to just charge a uniform rate to both commercial and multifamily customers because a lot of those accounts tend to be larger, and so the tier 1 rates sometimes can be the amount of water received from 10 HCF isn't enough to support some of those larger accounts, so it's just cleaner to charge a uniform rate to those types of customers. And you can see how those rates would be built a bit differently. The tiered rates would have most of the costs at the base here, the fixed and variable costs, most of the consumption related costs, and we just put all the conservation costs on tier 2, whereas for the uniform rates, the conservation costs are spread across all water usage. But they're still paying the same amount, and the average rate paid by all of single family will be equal to the uniform rate. So between customer classes, there's equity. Here is a snapshot of what the rate changes will look like for Ord Water in the rate schedule. The question that was asked during the last meeting was how can we have uniform rates for the multifamily and non-residential if right now we have tiered rates and that 770 isn't a real rate, that's just the effective rate that they're currently paying. When I take all of the money that's being spent by those customers and the amount of how much they've spent and how much they paid for it, it comes out to 770, so they're actually seeing a small decrease in their consumption rate on average. And then easier numbers to understand in terms of how this is gonna affect folks. You can see different types of customers and how their bill's gonna change. This is a monthly bill.
Can I just make a quick question, because I think before when you showed us the bar graph of the different organizations' costs, ours was relatively low, but it was also based on 10 HCF. So last time I spoke with you, I was thinking we could just show the increase and still on that same bar graph where we would be kind of on the low side, but these are based on 3, 5, and 6 HCF, right? So we don't have a exact comparison with that bar graph from before.
Which bar graph are you referring to?
I think you showed it earlier, I think around page 10 maybe.
Oh, the survey?
The rate comparison, right?
Yeah, the rate comparison, there,
This one?
yeah, this one is based on 10 HCF on 12, page 12.
Right.
Okay,
So
Yeah,
that's
that's a good
based
point.
on tier one, that's the full tier one
Yeah.
loaded rate. Whereas the other one is the average of what our customers are using.
the 3, 5, and 6.
Right. But I could, for the next presentation, I could do one for 6 or 5, if you think that's a better comparison.
I just like to compare apples and oranges when I'm keeping things in my
Sure,
head.
yeah, no, I'm the same way.
Right.
Happy to, I'll do that. It's easy to change that.
Okay,
Okay. So then on Marina water, you can see the change in the rates in year one. I didn't mention earlier that, when we look at the change from current to year one, if you do the percentages in your head, they're not gonna be 20% one than the next, and that's because of the cost of service and the rate structure changes. So different parts of the structure are changing by different percentages in year one only. After that, in year 2, 3, 4, and 5, they'll all be by the same percentage, but in this first year, because it's a zero-sum game and some parts of the rates are going up more than others, you will see different percentages if you look at the change. But at the end of the day, the average customer will see a 20% increase. And here you can see what that looks like in dollars for different types of customers for Marina water. All right, so on the sewer side, currently all of the sewer rates are fixed based on, depends on how many dwelling units you have if you're residential, and it depends on how many EDUs were assigned to you. If you're commercial, EDUs are assigned by the district when a customer joins based on anticipated or assumed amount of sewage production, depending on the nature of the commercial account. And what's being proposed is that we continue to recover half of the revenue through that system, but the other half of the revenue is based on estimated actual sewage production, which we look at wintertime water usage for residential to estimate how much sewage they're actually producing, so that customers who are producing more do end up paying more. And so that's summarized here. So we will be looking at actual monthly water usage for all non-residential, and we'll be looking at annualized winter water usage for residential. So this is what it looks like for Marina sewer. You can see on a monthly basis, it goes from $17.98 per dwelling unit to $9.45 per dwelling unit, plus another $1.85 per HCF of estimated sewage flow.
Director Moore?
So I do have a question, since we're changing in part to sewer fees being partly related to wintertime water usage. And I'm not sure if this question is necessarily for you, but rather for council. I could see the possibility that as part of the 218 process, a customer would say, okay, what's my first year when these rates go into effect? What's my add-on, flow-based add-on? Tell me what my add-on charge will be for my house.
We can do that.
Well, the question is, do we need to do that? We probably can, maybe we should, but also, do we legally need to do that as part of the 218 notice somehow?
Not for each individual account, you wouldn't have to.
No, it's the proposed formulas, where you don't need to come down to for each individual customer. That's
But we may want to, from a PR perspective, to reveal that soon.
Beyond the notice, are you saying we should send a bill to every one of our customers saying this is your proposed bill under the new rate structure?
Well, maybe, or this is how many, this is going to be your flow amount that will go into this formula. So be your property's flow amount going into this formula starting July 1st, 2024. I mean, aren't they gonna see that in their first bill? But they may say, hey, why didn't you tell me about that before I got to submit a protest or not?
Well, I'll need to look into it, but I don't think that there's a problem with, after everything's done, the 218 notice is cast, and we're on the track, sending a letter to each one of our customers and informing them of
What their figure is.
this is what your usage was December, January, and February. This is now how you will be prorated for this coming year.
Don't we have a little bit of notice space in the bill anyway?
But I think it's probably I would prefer to go with a letter, it's
Okay,
whatever.
So just on caution, just as a general proposition, this is the disconnect between the legal side of Prop 218 and from PR side, what should be done.
Yep.
We always exercise caution, because the only thing clear about 218 says about, you have to send out the notice, and it specifies the categories of information needs to be in there. The problem with that is if you send out something else other than that, there's always the argument that, well, I was confused or wasn't clear because they sent out this other information. And so in trying to do the right thing,
You might,
you're undercutting complying with that. And I'm making sure that we're clear.
Well, I think that if we go after the board adopts the rates, then that's the time when we send out some kind of information to every one of the customers, informing them what their average is. That way, at least they understand, but it's after the fact, so it doesn't wrinkle the 218
I'll
process.
just suggest staff and legal machinate or masticate or whatever the right word is to chew over this concept.
I like the concept, I think that, more outreach is always better. Just caution that the first bill's going out on July 1st. Staff is gonna have their hands full for the first time, going back and getting wintertime water usage from the water utility and tying that to a sewer account. I mean, that's gonna be a big
Heavy
lift,
lift.
a lot of them will pair over really easily, but then there's gonna be hundreds, if not thousands of accounts that aren't going to, pair easily, and so staff's gonna have their hands full to get it ready by July 1st, which means it's gonna be really hard to send out a notice ahead of time. Just,
Mary wants to address
Plus
that.
also, I just want to say, we also need to get the system ready, with all these changes. So there's already, a big amount of workload, for the customer service division just to get the system ready, for these new rates. But
Well, the thing is, we're gonna have to come up with this number one way or another.
yes,
So the number will exist,
yes,
which means we can send a letter.
it already exists, we have those.
it just might be the day before they get the bill.
Yeah, well, and I think that that's the point, right? We we wanna reach out to them, we wanna help them understand that this is specific to you, that work was done, and to provide an opportunity to challenge it, right? You may look at it and if you're my mom, she's not using that much water, she's in a house by herself, right? And if she comes back with 20 units a month, something's wrong, and we need to know that, and we need to be able to be flexible enough to go back in, look at it, assess it, judge it, weigh it, change it or not, and then move on. So I think there's value here. Anyway,
So I was gonna say, the other alternative, I suggest that this late date, but I could certainly see a customer saying, well, wait a minute, if I'd known you were going to be making this change, I would have done something about my winter water use from December 2023 to March 2024. You know, so the only other alternative is to do a 218, which just for July 1st, 2024 through June 30th, 2025, we stick with a fixed sewer charge.
So-
And then transition to.
I'm gonna call myself to talk here. The point is that we've gone through this process. We've had multiple public meetings. This slide and where you're talking about how you're going to determine the rate for how many times you flush the toilet, how many times you use your wash machine is basically what's gonna impact your flow-based charges. And that we've set this structure up under some prudent thinking and planning, that we're not looking at landscaping. We've used what are industry acceptable standards to determine how we're going to compute this. To ask us at this point, after 4 public meetings, we have another one coming, is I agree with council. The point is that we've sent this message, we've articulated this message. We've made our staff available for telephone calls. We've made our staff available for email communications. We have done that outreach. You're never going to be able to give notice on a one-on-one basis. That's not what 218 requires. And to get contradictory, what could be interpreted as contradictory documentation being sent before this process is complete is frightening to me, because then people are gonna say I detrimentally relied on the letter I got. So I wanna go back to, we're having this meeting, where you're asking us tonight for a recommendation that we give the notice, we set the next date, which we have been told a tentative date that you've asked for, which is May what?
June 17th.
June 17th,
June 17th.
yes.
So June 17th would be the conclusion, and at that date, the board would be adopting these as the rates. Is that correct?
Correct.
And then by July 1, our billing cycle, when bills go out in the month of July, which is 13 days later, or some period of time, this all needs to be inputted into our computer system and notices go.
So it'll be August 1st, because the 30.
Oh, you bill backwards,
Well,
sorry,
we also have the ordinance 30-day holding period.
for a
before we-
second reading.
Before we go. So
Okay,
It won't happen
so-
until August.
So August 1. So at the point, to your comment, if there was going to be a letter, it would not, in my opinion, go out prior to the full acceptance and implementation of the plan by the board, to avoid the legal challenges and the confusion,
Correct.
and not in advance. But I do want to invite the public at this point personally, and is that if there are confusion, if you don't understand this flow-based charge and you want some further indication, we have staff that can answer that question and can work through with you on an individual basis if you call and ask, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So anyway, that's my point of view.
Well, and perhaps our general manager already has. One thing I don't necessarily want to see is our GM and staff being inundated with hands going up in the form of emails and phone calls coming in August, September timeframe. Whoa, you've given me a fixed charge on my sewer, but now you've added this $35 here. And the $35, if I read your notices correctly, is because last winter, I used a whole bunch of water, but last winter, my meter broke and you came out and fixed my meter. And, you left me with these huge amounts.
It's a de minimis portion of the
Yeah.
population that you're talking about, so I'm not worried about customer service weighing that part. And I also, having been a customer in this space and understanding when it was happening during the winter, you really can't shave flushes the way you think you can. So if you're a conservation person, you're already engaged in that activity, you're gonna benefit by it. If you're not, you're not. So,
But you have the power, and customer service has the power for reasonable exceptions to be made to deal with that if there is
Yes.
some
the
rational
yes.
justification.
Which is the point of the letter. If after we adopt the rates, we send a letter saying this is what your usage was, and we're gonna set this as your variable. If that number, and we'll put this in the letter, if they don't agree with the number or they're concerned about the number, let us know and we'll walk them through it. And if we find out that they're at a meter break or whatever it is, we'll deal with it.
Thank you. Were you planning on using the same format of a bill that we currently have? Or was it gonna be some additional explanation? Because I think it'd be helpful if, specifically for this point, to put another line item in there as to how exactly that was calculated. Because otherwise, if you just put a flat,
No, there won't be a flat. You'll see the fixed
you'll see,
and you'll see the variable,
okay, just like
just like the
it
water
is up
side.
there.
Yeah,
Okay, so there will be another actual line underneath?
Yes.
Okay. Then that helps to make it more.
absolutely.
Intelligible.
Yeah. I'm not hiding anything.
Right.
Okay, Mark, we're ready to resume. Thank you.
And, the points that were made earlier, I think anybody who is aware of their bill and manages their water usage because they're conservation oriented and they're worried about their water bill, they're gonna find themselves being the folks who are actually gonna see a decrease in their bill because of this system. It's gonna benefit those people who care about their bill, right? And so I think the portion of the population that's most likely to be concerned are gonna be happily pleased by what they see on their bill.
And Mark, before you leave, and the average household is gonna see a 72-cent change, which I think is de minimis on the margin.
Correct. Yeah, it really isn't, go ahead. Yeah, I mean, the structural change is not looking to charge folks a lot more, it's just looking to charge folks who are using a lot of water more, and those folks tend to be the ones who don't really care.
But the whole structure is anticipated to be equitable. That's the whole point. That is the key criteria
Yes,
here,
Yes.
is that you pay for what you're using and for the cost of us to deliver that service to you,
that's right.
both sewer and water. And everybody is being asked to pay their fair share. And all of these meetings have been to explain that, to tell us the criteria, the standards, the assumptions that you've used, and how you have come to these conclusions, and then how you have equitably distributed that among the different classes of users.
That's right. That's
So,
the
and
number
we-
one criteria.
And we have gone through this so many times. I personally think you've done an excellent job, Mark, in your presentation and how you presented this with your slideshows, the repetitiveness, and I'm hoping the public is watching and listening and is as informed as those of us in this room, so that it goes smoothly for staff. But I think you've done your job. Thank you.
Thank you. So we just have Orange Sewer, which similar changes from $38 a month to $20.55 fixed, and then $4 per unit. And then you can see, pretty substantial decrease for low water users, single family. And generally speaking, multifamily, you can see they're all going down. That's because multifamily accounts tend to be pretty efficient in their water usage, so, well, as a group, though.
Well, could you clarify that last slide where you had on the previous, not applicable, so,
Well, because there's no flow-based charge currently.
oh, under the current, but,
Right.
okay, so under the future, you'll see a.
That's right. Yeah. And then this slide is just showing the total bill. So if we take the average customer, the average single family with average water usage, you can see just the combined total bill and the change that they'll be seeing. So these numbers all match what you saw previously for the average water user for both water and sewer.
10.
Yeah, and this is the one that's 5 HCF rather than 10 of the other average, slide number 12.
Is this 1.5?
Yes, this is the one coming out of the tables for our average user, so that's 6.
Oh,
Six.
6 is average, sorry, sometimes it's 5 on there.
Right, so the reason it's 6 for water and 5 for sewer, because sewer we're looking at wintertime.
Okay,
Right.
okay.
But you're right, that is, I can see why that's a bit confusing.
Okay.
Recycled water is just going to see a 5% rate increase across the board. No changes to the rate structure for recycled water, it's just one customer at this time. And the cost of service study was conducted pretty recently, so there was no need to update that. And then we're also proposing water shortage surcharges, which addresses the fact that when there is a significant reduction in water usage, whether it's because of drought or for any other reason, you will see a pretty significant decrease in rate revenue because of your decrease in consumption charges. You'll see a bit of a decrease in your electricity costs, and you will see an increase in your conservation program. And so we model all those changes to see what sort of surcharge you would need to protect the district financially during different stages of drought. And the strategy, the financial strategy here isn't just raise the rates on customer. There's also there is that portion where we do have to apply a surcharge, but the district is also assuming that they'll reduce capital spending during severe drought because the focus of the district will be elsewhere and not, on capital during those particular years. It'll be more about water supply. And there will be a measured use of financial reserves during those years. So you can see, this is an example. We didn't get into all this detail. Is this the first time you guys are seeing this slide? I believe so. So I'll go a little bit slower because last week I showed sort of a graphical representation because that was more of a more mixed public outreach. But so there's 5 different stages that are defined by your water shortage contingency plan, which is part of your urban water management plan. And you have these defined reduction goals that are the top row. So up to 10% reduction for stage 1 and greater than 50% for stage 5. And so we looked at what would be the financial impacts of these different types of stages. How much will you lose in water sales? How much will your utility costs go down? And how much will your conservation costs increase? And you can see the net impact for each stage of drought. So it'd be up to $1.3 million for Marina water in the stage 5 drought would be the net financial impact. And so you can see the 3 different prongs of the corrective strategy here. We increase revenue from surcharges, and you can see the impact from that. We would reduce capital spending, and you can see the impact of that. And then we would use a bit of reserves during each of those phases as well. During the stage 1, there would be no surcharge, and there would be no change in capital spending because stage 1 droughts happen. And I think the district needs to be prepared to live through a stage 1 drought without changing its operations. It's just, part of life in California, right? So we actually use that as a benchmark. We said, okay, during the stage 1 drought, we would see we're prepared to absorb $118,000 because we have the reserves to protect us against that. That's why we have reserves, is to protect ourselves. So we basically sort of fine-tuned the surcharge and the decrease in capital spending were actually tailored to result in a similar use of reserves during every one of the stages, so that each stage looked the same from a financial standpoint. And so last but not least, here are the surcharges. So these percentages would be applied just to the consumption rate, not to the fixed charge.
The fact that it worked out like that was kind of crazy.
Yeah,
That is-
that was
that's
not,
really
in fact, I
interesting,
don't
yeah.
like that. I don't like it when it comes out, because that looks like you just,
Did
made
it.
up numbers and put it on the board. So I was like, oh man. But that's, can't change what the numbers came out to. And they came out, okay, so this is a different graph. You didn't see this one. This is what would happen if you did not do anything during the stages. You can see this is during normal times, and then, so our revenues and our expenses offset. And then you can see the deficit that gets created all the way until stage 5 between revenues and expenses. And then this adds in the corrective actions. So the light blue is the additional revenue, that closing that gap. And the dashed portion is the reduction in capital spending. So that brings the top of the brown is how much you're spending, and then that empty box is what you're not spending. And you can see that deficit, the difference between the top of the blue and the brown remains the same through each stage.
Go ahead, Drew.
I have another question on that. It just occurred to me that when you mentioned the flow-based, so there'd be a mitigation for drought, makes sense on the flow-based portion of the bill for the water.
For water, yeah.
Does it at all change then also the sewer collection as people reduce their water consumption? Would there be any need for a mitigating measure on the sewer, or it would be so tiny it wouldn't matter?
No, these rates go into effect across the board because we're reducing the amount of flow in the sewer system, which means our O&M function is gonna go through the roof.
Well, but I think the question is there a financial impact on the sewer enterprise during times of drought, and do we need similar
That's what I'm
type of
saying.
protections?
Well, I'm interpreting this to be 10% for everybody. All cost centers go through this event.
Okay, it's not just flow-based water, but it's also flow-based.
No, it only applies to water rates. This doesn't apply to sewer rates.
Okay,
Sorry, but we didn't talk about that. The way it's written currently, I only modeled it for water. Sewer tends to be more resilient because during drought, people change their outdoor water usage.
Yeah.
So it's mostly the irrigation accounts, and it's mostly the summertime water usage by residential. That's the 80% of your water change in behavior is gonna come from those things. So sewer doesn't tend to, yes, people will be more cognizant and they'll flush a little bit less, but not enough for it to have much of a financial burden. So
Okay, but wouldn't it also be adjusted if you're looking at wintertime flows, that if people are conserving December, January, February, and they maintain that practice, their sewer flow, the variable cost is going to go down too in the next billing cycle.
yeah, for a whole year.
Right.
They'll lock in.
They'll
for a whole
benefit,
year.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've never actually done a sewer or a water shortage surcharge on sewer. And I've worked with utilities that are even more, more dependent on variable rates for sewer than this is set up. But, I guess we'll find out that during the next year.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it seems like it would
I-
self-correct in some ways, and
Mhm.
when you talk about how much water you use.
There's not a drought sewer surcharge. I mean, not to say that it couldn't happen, but it doesn't. I'm not aware of any agency that has a drought surcharge for sewer.
Me neither,
okay.
never heard of it.
Derek?
I haven't heard of it either.
Well, I'm more concerned about making sure that you have sufficient revenues to do the work in the sewer system if we're reducing flows. And I don't know that we've seen flows change between.
Well, if you're reducing flows, you're gonna offset your power cost quite a bit this year, so you're gonna gain on that. So hopefully
The balance.
balance out, yeah.
I
Okay.
mean, I think if there was a drought and the sewer revenues go down a significant event, it's an issue with the rate itself. It's not something that gets fixed with a drought surcharge on sewer. It's a function of the rate, which I think the robustness of it doesn't, there obviously may be something temporary or something of that nature, but something long-term that's gonna be a significant hit to the district, I would be surprised.
Thank you.
Excellent question, thank you.
Yeah, great questions, and, you know, this type of, if you do find that, you know, you feel like there's a vulnerability there, we don't have to wait 5 years to come up with a similar policy for sewer and just tack that on, you know, it's pretty fast work. So then here are the similar numbers for water. So again, the percentages, these utilities have very similar profiles in terms of their costs, run by the same agency, same region. So we end up with the same percentages, and the use of reserves is a bit larger because it's a larger fund, and so it can absorb more. And here's a graph for forward water, same idea. We also are just updating the private fire meter charge, just by the CPI. So there's a charge for folks who have private fire connections for their fire protection, and will be increased it by 2.4% based on the CPI index over the last year. And the recommended policy is that you continue to update these charges every year based on the previous year's change in CPI.
So these private fire meter charges, are they for the people in the newer neighborhoods that have the fire meter for the sprinklers?
Commercial has
Or
sprinklers.
are they a different set of people?
Mostly commercial, but I defer to, I'm not familiar with who.
Yeah, it's not residential, it's the number, so it's like 300 and something in Ord and 50 something in Marina.
Okay, but it's for, commercial, more like the
More like-
dunes shopping area, that kind
Yeah.
of thing. Okay, thank you.
Director Moore.
Well, the chart says for 1-inch meter,
Right.
and don't most of the new homes in the Oregon community have 1-inch meters because they have fire sprinkler systems?
But it's
now required.
they have a fire meter, it's different. This is a private fire service, so we're servicing somebody's fire stand.
Director.
So is this charged to all single family residents?
No, that's what we're saying, there's only
It's not
325 private fire services in all of Ord, and there's 58 or something
Oh,
like that.
private
Marina.
fire. Well, what's that fire charge that's on the bill?
That's because you have a 1-inch meter that sits adjacent to your meter,
Okay, so that's separate,
that's different.
and every home is different?
And every home that has a fire system in it has a meter.
Okay, so you wouldn't see them
You will not see them in this.
in Marina?
Yeah, no, you wouldn't see those in Marina, unless in the new construction.
Just the new construction, like C
But yeah, it's better to say, you'll see them in new construction where we're
Okay.
required to have fire systems in house.
Okay.
And that's the end of my presentation, so the next steps would be the board to direct staff to finalize the 218 notice and then get that mailed on May 3rd. And that would start the clock for the 45-day waiting period, and we hold the public hearing on the 17th of June. And then rates will be effective July 1st, but it sounds like they'll be actually implemented August 1st because of the realities of the billing system and getting that. And a separate 30-day noticing period that Redmond mentioned.
So, Madam President, staff would recommend the consideration of resolution number 2024, number 16, to approve the district's 2024 5-year water, wastewater, and recycled water rate study and cost allocation